Yeah, so we have a lot to get through today, so I will pass on to the rest of the crew. First, Iona will tell you briefly about the project and why we did it, and then Sue will say a bit about the sort of social movements and landscape and council landscape in Sheffield and Glasgow in their respective cities, and then Ruth will briefly outline our initial findings. I'm stressing initial because there would be so much more to say, and we will continue going forward with this project. And after that, we will then show you the beautiful, beautiful posters that we are launching today. And in sort of about half an hour from now, we will go into breakout groups where you then have time to get to know others in the room and reflect on what you have heard up till then. And then we will briefly then come together again before we wrap up at 8:30. So that's the plan. That's all from me for now. Without further ado, Iona.
Hi everyone, how are you doing? Welcome and thank you for taking the time this evening to join us. This event is being held by, as Fanny's introduced, 3 collaborative partners. So we have Ruth from It's Our City in Sheffield, who ran a successful campaign and referendum to democratise their local council. We have the Sane Collective, my organisation, who's working on challenging neoliberal policy and exploring radical democracy up in Glasgow. And then Research for Action is a cooperative with members in England and Scotland who carry out research projects that support social, economic and environmental justice. And we came together last year to take on a research project around the relationships between local campaigning and local democracy. So tonight we are launching the artwork that we've developed as part of that project. And I'm pleased that we're welcoming back some of the activists and campaigners that we spoke with over the course of our research into the room together. But of course, this research really speaks to themes that are far wider than just our experiences. And so this evening is also a chance to hear from new voices. And yeah, want to extend a special welcome to those of you who are here who aren't familiar with the project already. We called the project Democratising Local Governance. And our starting point was really the kind of incredible groundswell of community and grassroots activism that was already active throughout Glasgow and Sheffield. And we've been building on the premise that local campaigns are coming up against a common set of democratic barriers and share a common set of democratic goals. And so from the stories of people and groups that are trying to enact local change, we can shed light on the ways that local power is distributed, how it manifests. At the same time, local campaigns also fulfill some really important democratic functions in challenging power, intervening in the systems that exist, seeking improvements and creating different spaces for people to exercise agency over their lives. And so we believe that local campaigns are also collectively important as a site for thinking and working on new forms of democracy. So that's sort of the loose territory that we've been exploring over the last 7 months. We've been holding conversations amongst activists in Sheffield and in Glasgow, and we've been working with Reese, our fantastic artist, to document these insights that we've been uncovering. And we're pleased to be able to launch that element of the work tonight. And as for where the project goes next, again, part of that may be determined by the direction of the conversations here this evening. So we'll be really keen to hear your thoughts, whether that's in the breakout rooms or in the chat. So I'm going to pass over to Ruth, who's going to tell us a little bit about the context for Sheffield that Sheffield found itself in when we began this project. You're muted, Ruth, so just unmute yourself.
Hello, everybody. I may be horribly close to the screen. I occasionally have problems with my my microphone here, so if I'm horribly close, you can just pull back or something. But I'm sorry about that. So I'm Ruth, and I'm one of the co-founders of It's Our City here in Sheffield. And It's Our City emerged out of the street tree crisis in Sheffield, when growing numbers of campaigners came to realise that the crisis was about more than trees. And as Professor Matt Flinders puts it, it was also about the failure of local democracy, and particularly about what is perceived to be a disconnected and disinterested local political elite that treats the city as a fiefdom. And he also wrote about its highly defensive political culture and very centralized decision-making process, within the city's political system. So the It's Our City focus strategy and content, if you like, was designed specifically to speak to the politics of the street tree crisis. And it was an entirely citizen and volunteer-led campaign, and we ran the biggest citizen-led campaign of its kind anywhere in the country, using legal levers, community rights in the Localism Act, which I think doesn't apply to Scotland, but we used our community rights in the Localism Act to force and win a referendum for a change of governance. And the change came into effect a year ago, so it's very early days. It's Our City is now deconstituted, and we exist only as a very loose network. And that speaks to the exhaustion of running campaigns, perhaps. But I like to think it also speaks to a strategic sense of what's right when. During this project, the inquiry report into the street tree crisis, 227 pages, a catalogue of failures, of serious and sustained failure of strategic leadership, and placing responsibility with the political leadership of the city. And you will understand from all this that questions of local and governance and democracy are highly politicised in Sheffield. And this presents problems and challenges for the machinery of the council and for citizens and communities across the city. So Sheffield is in a state of flux, uncertainty. We are an active site of contestation over our local democracy and our governance, with all that involves, and likewise the opportunities it may present. There are attempts to own this space from all quarters. Sheffield is currently in a period of no overall control, which has been the case for the last 2 years. This is the extreme exception. Only 4 times in the last 100 years there have been brief periods when Labour has not controlled the city politically. At the moment, we are in the annual show of strength between the political parties that is our local elections. We do not have proportional representation, so next week we might be looking at a situation where 1 in 10 of the electorate might vote for a party which will then claim all decision-making power in the city. This is a battle for the formal levers of power in our council. In this context, where 7 in 10 don't even vote, it will be understandable, but for many, the issue is well beyond parties and into very basic issues of trust and legitimacy. It's lovely to be part of this project. I felt like I've brought so much because of the It's Our City work, but it's been great to sit back and be able to listen and hear about what others are saying. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth. Sue, you're next. And you need to unmute yourself, Sue.
Right. I thought I had unmuted myself. Sorry about that. As I said, I'm part of the same collective. You've already heard a little bit about that from Iona, but our collective works to critique and challenge the neoliberal direction of policy in Glasgow, which is quite deep-seated. And we have produced several reports critically engaging with council strategies and their impact on residents. We work to the principles of radical municipalism, that is, that accepting the centrality of cities and towns in the development of a progressive agenda. We are particularly involved in different processes aimed at building a social movement of movements to bring people together to co-create a people's plan built around a revitalised local democracy and a Glasgow that works for people and for planet. It currently doesn't. In Glasgow, we have a minority administration, which is led by the SNP. I'm sure you're au fait with what's happening with them at the moment. There is proportional representation and we have multi-member wards. This has had the effect of slightly opening up the local authority to smaller parties, and the Greens have been beneficiaries of this. However, they have not been able to prevent budget cuts of over £500 million over the last 10 years, and many services are now on their knees. There has been an active anti-closures campaign, which has had some success. Like the rest of Scotland, Glasgow also has notional joint planning, which we call community planning, across all public organisations, where resources are supposed to be collectivised and bent towards a set of jointly agreed priorities. At best, this only makes marginal improvements to the lives of Glasgow residents and has made no impact on inequality. Glasgow still has the highest relative poverty rate in Scotland, according to the recent report from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, and as a consequence, the worst health. Despite this, Glasgow City Council has aspirations for using its economic plan and the development of the financial services district to create a world-class city. At the same time, people are often reliant on third sector organisations. And one of the things that the co-learning conversations that we'll talk about a bit more reminded us is how thin our democracy actually is. Participants in those conversations had been involved in both the fight to save council services and dealing with the impact of the cuts to what was known as the Communities Fund, which many smaller yet absolutely vital organisations for local communities rely on. And this shed light on two things: the willingness of the council to misrepresent their people to suit their own needs, but also from our side, the lack of connectivity between grassroots organisations and the limited coherence across what we call the landscape of resistance. There is a lot of activism, but it's perhaps not pulling the weight that it might. And this means that the impact of this considerable amount of positive service delivery and activism is diluted, giving the council more headroom to promote its own agenda. And certainly we hoped by participating in this particular project that we could help to illuminate that more and encourage people to get more involved and interact more profitably. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue, and thank you, Ruth, for giving us that context. We will next move on to what we found out by talking to, by running these co-learning conversations in each cities. And Ruth will talk us through these initial findings. And Ruth has a couple of slides which Joe will share if you're there.
I think we can go on to the next one. Okay, it says findings, but what follows is, of course, only a very brief snapshot. This was an exploration of the local landscape of resistance, as some Glasgow campaigners call it, with an understanding that local campaigners might, in some senses, be at the front line of aspirations and efforts to create more just and equal local societies, and that democracy claims are an important part of that. This is an incredibly brief, small part of what we heard and are continuing to map out, make sense of, and kind of connect with. So it's great at this stage to try and open that up a bit and hear it, how it connects with others too. Next slide. We held 4 co-learning conversations. Sorry, the previous one, Joe. We held 4 co-learning conversations, 2 in each of Glasgow and Sheffield, with about 30 campaign groups overall. I should say 30-ish, as some campaigners were linked to several different campaigns. And the conversations we held were only loosely structured about activities and strategies, about experiences of councils, and about exploring common understandings. This was an exploratory project, and we wanted to open up this territory and give scope to groups to shape those group conversations. It was trying to understand and map more rather than ask things as defined by us or according to existing arrangements. Next slide. Okay, so we wanted to give you an idea of the range of areas or fields or sectors, if you like, people are connected to. I was really very uncomfortable doing this table because I felt I was shoehorning people into boxes that they might not want to be shoehorned into. Because of course, many campaigns and the work they do don't fit into comfortable boxes or pre-given service areas. And I think we'd expect this from many groups, many of whom by definition prioritize bottom-up lived experiences. And often that's described as filling the gaps or making up for cuts or, or making up for cuts or the impact of COVID. But actually, I think there's a deeper point here, which is that far from just filling gaps, the things that people organize around are already a countercurrent to how organizations operate under some of the silos and service areas they operate in. And so these campaigns shape up against more traditional forms of organization. And that brings important insights and challenges. I mean, we went for diversity and we got diversity. And each group that participated, I put into two boxes here. Organizationally, campaigning groups were either hyperlocal, citywide, and were in a few cases part of regional or national structures too, or included a focus beyond the city, both in a practical sense and sometimes in a thinking sense, kind of global diasporas, for example, in terms of migrant organizing and so on. And participants included a few long established campaign groups through to those very newly or recently formed or forming in response to an issue arising. Almost all the groups appeared to have no sort of paid workers. Many were operating with no significant annual incomes at all. But there were some who were operating with bigger incomes and also delivering what we might traditionally more call services. We move on to the next slide. Now, these next two slides, they are about the activities, the purpose, the strategy, the tactics, and they're all jumbled up, but they are much closer to what people talked about, how they described themselves and what they were trying to do and how they were trying to do it. But I like them more because they are closer to what people talked about. And so if we just look through some of these, keeping radical history alive, reversing and challenging privatization and private interests, non-violent direct action and demonstrations, data collection, anti-racism, so on and so forth. And if we go to the next slide, it continues. That's back. Thank you. Policy and strategy development work, a whole range of engagements with councils and other bodies and each other, and so on and so forth. Developing new ways of working, political and public information sharing, awareness raising, use of the existing systems, freedom of information, public questions, petitions, legal levers. And it's an extraordinary range and the extraordinary number of strands in terms of strategies, tactics, and activities that comes under this umbrella phrase, local campaigning. And this list, by the way, is by no means exhaustive. Often these tiny, essentially unfunded groups were doing many things at the same time. Groups might be organising local demonstrations at the same time as negotiating with the council, at the same time as raising awareness or informing wider communities, at the same time as delivering some sort of service, at the same time as experimenting with different ways of working together and building networks, at the same time as pursuing specific complaints or account holding activities. And this speaks to the range of roles that we just call campaigning. But it's really important, I think, in terms of actually valuing some of the work that is done out there on often no money, apart from anything else. And these roles, I mean, you know, people around the room will recognize what people have said in the past about the roles people play in campaigns. So Moya talks about citizens, rebels, reformers, and change agents as all being important to social movements. And other people have talked about dutiful, disruptive, and damaging forms of activism. And we saw it all around the room. I mean, damaging activism is where you're seeking system change, transformations, and so on. Okay, if we go on, I'm just going to literally pick out a couple of things. The array of activities, strategies, how people talked about the problems, of course, reflects a whole array of how people understand the problem. And more often than not, it was multi-layered, complex, overlapping. You might overcome one issue and then you hit another. As someone said, the system is a monster. And there were very many different aspects to this monstrosity of a system. And I think Fanny would like me not to give you the examples of how the system was a monster, so I won't. But there were some, I will give you one example. The system is a monster in terms of not knowing about it, how it's supposed to work, and the lack of knowledge about it. And people who work in council systems who think they are logical, linear, clear, rational, and what campaigners see is a monster, and people who don't know about it and don't understand it. And people said very different things about this. But I want to give you one quote. If it's like if you're playing a game of chess and you know the rules, provided you know the rules, it's impossible for you not to get to the checkmate stage. But there were many different aspects of this. The impact of the influx and incorporation of private interests into the public was writ large in a lot of this monstrous work, and what this means for basic systems of accountability, transparency, and democracy. For example, the ability to access basic information. And then the kind of managerialist or technocratic solutions or mindset that councils often impose. Someone told us a story about huge losses of funding in their area, accompanied by the loss of 6 out of 8 local service managers. And essentially the response was the development of a new slogan, stronger voices. Others also talked about the deep irrationality of what's happening, the mismatches between what is claimed and what is delivered. And someone at some point said, at some point, the madness has to be addressed. And all of that happens in a context of huge cuts, restructuring, and so on, that we know about. It's almost impossible, I think, for council systems to work, if you like. Then finally, I'll pick out the dilemmas of, no, I want to say, there was a range in both cities as to the extent that clear strategies were articulated. Some had very clear operating models, but this went through to those who were only beginning to approach understanding their problem and were trying to understand what was going on and develop their strategies. And others clearly revisited and revised their analyses all the time. And yet there were still others that were trying to embrace emergent strategies. When you don't know where you're trying to get to, when you're trying to develop a system, for example, that might be called post-capitalist, you don't necessarily know what it looks like. And you knew the future had to be different, but you didn't quite know what it was. And there was this sense of, can we embrace more tentative emergent strategies? Finally, the dilemmas of engagement for campaigners. And that's all that people around the room will know about. The worries about being co-opted, being captured, the importance of energies being sapped. And there was a lot of sense of groups who move in and out, and move in and out, and concerns about how participating in some of the systems may be shoring up systems that ultimately people want to fight against. And so there were questions about where people were allowed to engage, but also questions about where and how and whether we engage or not.
Ruth, I am not an example hostile person in principle, but I am in the unfortunate role of the timekeeper. So if you can.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm just coming on to these three. I'm going to cover three last slides. And what I've done is try to bring out the next slide. I've tried to bring out some of the democracy and governance concerns, and I will not go through all of these, but I've divided them in here into, there is a slide here on traditional concerns, what I call traditional concerns that people are bringing to the table, the issues that we've known about for a long time, and the themes, if you like. The second slide is on, sorry, the next one, Joe, is about issues about working with councils. And there was a difference between Glasgow and Sheffield. The politicization of the territory in Sheffield came out very strongly. That creates real barriers to more rounded local democracies. And then the final slide is actually on a broader canvas, a broader territory where groups are working. And I think this came out of all our discussions. I will just say, if you don't mind, I will say a little bit more about this. What we were hearing from campaigners was not that we were reducing discussions down to the way formal systems of local governance operate in councils. This is not about councils improving their freedom of information response rates, for example. What we saw was the landscape of local democracy and governance for local campaigners lies way beyond the kinds of existing solutions that ever contracting councils seem able or willing to supply. This is a broader canvas for our local democracy and the ways things are done. Tentatively, our participants did not understand democracy as practiced, making a huge amount of sense, or as centered on the state. They did not understand power as stored up in formal institutions. They seemed to understand it as a project of empowerment and equality. On one hand, people wanted systems that operated with values and competence, but even if they did, there was a wider project of justice and equality. Shall I stop there, Fanny?
Unfortunately, just for the interest of time, and because we need to, keep something for the next phase, we will be processing these findings further, and then we'll be sharing something with everybody, next autumn, maybe next winter. We shall see. Thank you so much, Ruth, though, for that introduction into these findings. Yes, like you heard from that, it was so, yeah, it was such a rich landscape. It was so interesting to speak to all this variety of groups and campaigners and community, you know, like just people active in their communities who are wanting to do things differently. It was super inspiring, as you, yeah, as Ruth has just showed you in her words. So next, we are going to show you something else very exciting, which is, yeah, some artwork. I will pass on to Iona.
Thank you, Fanny. Yeah, one of our aims really from the outset of this project was to produce a creative resource that could be used by the community groups like the ones that we've been working with. And we've been lucky enough to be joined at all of our co-learning conversations by Reese, our artist, who gave us the concept of posters that could be used as themselves as posters, but could also be printed in black and white and be used as a sort of as colouring pages, so that we can do sort of intergenerational work with them in community spaces or with community groups. So Reese has done a really beautiful job in distilling everything that you've just heard about into 4 posters. So the themes we selected are really important to us because they all, I think, reflect people's desires for the systems that shape our lives, to reflect the ways in which we live and work together and care for one another. So these themes all kind of touch on some common experiences from Glasgow and Sheffield, but loosely the posters in the purple colour scheme are more closely related to stories from Glasgow, and the posters in the green colour scheme are more closely related to the experiences from Sheffield. The posters are all going to be available to download in black and white form and in colour from the Research for Action website and from the Sane Collective website. So we'll send out a link after the event for you to access those. And we know that we want to print some, and we know that we want to have lots printed and used in spaces. So again, part of our discussion later on this evening is going to be about how best to use them. So please have a think about any ideas that you might have. Do we have somebody going to pull these up on the screen? And we'll just take you through them one by one.
Yes, I am doing it now. Sorry, I got distracted by unmuting myself to tell you that I'm doing it. Probably wouldn't have needed to do.
Beautiful, thank you, Fanny. So this is Care. So the imagery for this theme came from the stories of those residents in cities without citizenship who have their own relationship to local authorities. So people without citizenship are unable to exercise agency in elections or in consultations, but they rely very deeply on the availability and accessibility of strong public services, including transport. So they're frequently really vulnerable to the sharpest edge of local austerity and the decline of public services. During our research, we met with groups who have provided physical accommodation for women without citizenship and advocated for employment, housing, and dignity. We heard about a letter writing campaign in which individual testimonies were used to try and appeal to the humanity of individual councillors. So just like families and communities listen and organise to respond to one another's needs, we really need our systems of governance to place care at the heart of their operations too. Should we move on to the next one? So this is No Cuts. It should be coming up on your screen. It's not up on mine yet.
Okay, I am not sure why, because, oh, maybe if I'll hit new share just in case I need to do that. Sorry about that. Does it show now?
Beautiful, I can see it now. So this is No Cuts. So the imagery of the torn banknote kind of represents the damage that's inflicted on communities and, you know, the broken state of any economy when libraries, community centres and other public services see cuts instead of investment in their staff, services and facilities, while the flow of public funds to subsidise private profits does not falter. So the staples represent the efforts that community organisations take to ensure that the services are still delivered and the people are still looked after. During our research, for example, we met with one organisation who had taken over the ownership of one such facility in the face of closure by the council. And we heard many more stories of community and grassroots and third sector organisations kind of stepping in to fulfil the duties of the local authority in the face of cuts. And this community solidarity provides a much needed respite from the culture of cuts, but it shouldn't be up to residents to take on the council's job. And this kind of stepping up to provide for one another in times of need, that is an attitude that we need to see reflected in our local governance structures. Move on to the next one. Just building the anticipation here. We have my personal favorite. This is power. So the imagery for this poster, I'm sure will be familiar to many of you, particularly from Sheffield. It's taken from really the success of some of the groups that we spoke with during this research, with the community-led campaign to stop the felling of street trees. But it really resonates with the struggles for social and ecological justice being faced in all cities. Local authorities hold power over most facets of our lives, and when this power is misapplied or corrupted, it's up to us residents to reclaim power for our city's social and environmental well-being. The power that local authorities hold is the power that we give to them, and sometimes council need to be reminded about that and reminded that our collective voice has agency of its own. People all over the UK are acknowledging the urgency of this work and finding ways to reclaim power over their environments, even if it means breaking with convention or disrupting the status quo or taking personal risk. So we need our local authorities to realise the role that they have to play in social ecological transformation that is required to sustain our societies, and to find ways to reclaim that power, even if it means taking a few risks of their own. And finally, we have, wait for it, transparency. So the imagery for this poster comes from the experience all over the UK of trying to engage with local authorities, which often leaves people feeling like outsiders, struggling to peer through the glass into a mystical, inaccessible space in which decisions are made. The struggle for transparency and accountability from local authorities was an experience that was common to almost every group that we spoke with over the course of this research. The culture of stonewalling. Oh,
sorry, Iona, can you say what the little things at the bottom say?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So this represents a council building. And at the bottom, we have a couple of stickers from the council saying, we want to hear from you. Feel free to pop in on Mondays, and your council cares. So again, this is in sort of stark contrast to the way that councils portray themselves and like to prop themselves up on ideas of being very transparent and accountable to the people. And that's being very far removed from the lived experience faced by the people. So this culture of kind of stonewalling further reproduces the status quo of power feeling far removed from people, and makes it hard for people to feel like they are active participants in democracy, have influence, and can demand that the accountability that that they deserve. Combating this, we found that among networks of community and grassroots organisations, key information and updates are shared freely in solidarity with an underlying motivation for the collective good, which again is a model that we hope to see more in our local governance structures. So now that you've seen the 4 posters, please do have a think about how you or people that you know, people in your community might like to use them. If you have an idea or you would like to get involved in the next stages of what's going on with the posters, please jump into the chat and you can fire myself or Fanny a direct message, or if you're feeling sociable, just fire into the group chat and drop us your email address and your location and what your idea is. And you can do this at any point this evening, and we'll get a note of your details and get in touch with you. Cheers.
Thank you. And we're next going to go into breakout groups to talk a bit more about what you've just seen and so on. But before we do that, I just wanted to ask Reese if you wanted to say anything.
Oh, sorry, I forgot to ask.
Artwork has spoken to you, so there is no pressure. But if you want to say a few words, go ahead.
I think they look quite good, actually. Yeah, it was kind of like all these words that we heard so far, it's kind of a lot of pressure, but it was back and forth process. Seemed like it worked out, so I'm glad to see they exist in real life. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much, and thank you for creating this. They are really, really beautiful. And I can see some comments popping up in the chat saying that they're really beautiful. So yeah, I'm glad that this feeling is shared. So we will now go into breakout groups for half an hour, and you'll be automatically whisked into them by Joe in a minute, and somebody from the project will be facilitating the conversation. And you'll have a little bit of time to introduce yourselves, and then we'll ask you to discuss what you think of the findings, how you could imagine using the posters, you know, what all this means for working towards new forms of democracy, and how we build on these connections and, you know, joint learnings and address this fragmentation that we've seen. You're not going to crack the model for the future of local democracy in half an hour. Well, who knows? But yeah, see where your conversations take you to. So we will have half an hour, and then we'll come in for a quick little bit in the end. Now click join, everybody.
Ooh. Oh.
Mhm.
And you really want to say, yeah, just raise your hand and I'll come to you. Yeah, John, please.
Well, one thing that's really gripping me at the moment, because I'm quite heavily involved in it, is the thing about, you know, not get whether you actually participate, and if you do participate, how it affects the whole process, because I don't see how you can influence the process if you just sit back and watch. We need to be in there making our points and making our feelings felt, but there seems to be a pushback against that from people on our side.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, in terms of participation, it's on what basis? So you never go into, you know, you have to negotiate with the alternative, you know, the other side, but you have to do that on the basis of making sure that the other side understands where you are coming from. And if the other side don't get it at all, then I think you've got no choice but to stay outside. And the other thing to say is, if you do go inside, you make damn sure that the people who go in actually represent the movement outside.
Leo?
So just on the end of our breakout group, really interesting point was being made about how these movements, you know, in the actual functioning of the meetings and stuff like that, they have to represent the people they're about. And this is something that in Acorn we are kind of constantly trying to stay aware of and keep on top of. And I think it's really important, especially if you're moving to work with kind of people in insecure housing or migrants and asylum seekers, to remember that it might be the case that you're coming to it with skills that are needed, but that because of your background or your, you know, your politics or whatever like that, your instinct may be totally wrong for the situation. And I think, you know, it's very important to, you know, step aside for people and develop people who, because of their life background, may not have been given the skills to confidently kind of walk into a room and say, oh, I should be, you know, on the committee, or I should be leading this or organising that. You know, diversifying and sharing knowledge and skills between people and encouraging people to be confident that they have something to offer and that they, you know, can acquire those skills pretty easily, I think is really key in these movements.
Definitely. Yeah, Mark? And also, sorry, before Mark, while Mark is unmuting himself, I just want to say that you can obviously also pop comments in the chat if you don't want to speak to the whole group or whatever. Chat participation encouraged. Mark, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, Ruth encouraged me to raise a point that we spoke about in our group, which was about where our energy goes. So my kind of background is like sort of community development. So I've been, you know, one of those arm's length organizations where you're, you know, meant to encourage parents and things like that to get involved, and community members. But very clearly now, I can see that an awful lot of those systems that are set up in Scotland, you a thing called the community. You know, they love the ironic titles, the Community Empowerment Act, which has been distorted to such an extent that the idea was that it was local people could look at an asset and say, that's not being very well run. You know, we should have the right to kind of come in and we could run that better. What it's been turned into is we want to close the community centre. So if you want to keep it open, you're going to have to run it yourself. That's the, you know, that's the kind of way they distort these kind of policy platforms. So one is to support, make people aware that actually we need to start shifting our energies away from lobbying councillors to do the things they should be doing anyway, and actually building social movements that can actually stand up and challenge those. But the important thing is that it's social movements that are value-based. That's where the radical municipalist approach comes in. The feminisation of politics for me is absolutely crucial, and it's ironic because we've just had 5 men speaking there in a row, kind of thing. But it shows how embedded these systems are. I'll give you an example. So I was at a meeting on Tuesday about men's mental health. There's a brilliant young woman there who could only be in her early 20s from the thing called the Citizens Advice Bureau, which I'm sure you've all got citizens advice type places, but she did a lot of work with in prisons and a lot of work with debt cancellation with people. That's the kind of young woman who would be genius in these positions. But there's so many cultures. If you go into a political culture, even if you go into union cultures, often they're very patriarchal, they're very toxic. So it's only by creating these supportive, open, truly nurturing democratic environments that we can really start to grow a transformative change. And I'll shut up in a second, except for the fact that I just came out of a meeting with a woman called a webinar with Veronica Gago, who's a kind of writer and activist from Argentina. Honestly, I'll send around the link. Listen to this woman talk. She tells it like it is. Sometimes we need to listen to people from the global south. We need to listen to those people who have been, under military juntas and things like that, and realize what is possible if you put your heart, soul, and everything you've got into it.
Thank you. I'm noticing that people are asking about the posters in the chat. And I have just put a link to where the posters are up on Research for Action's website. So yeah, I'm not gonna start faffing around with sharing my screen anymore because I'm afraid that would just take a bit too long, probably off the 4 minutes that we have left. Yeah, but please do follow that link. The posters are there in color and in black and white. So yeah, please feel free to download them, print them out. I guess our dream is that, you leave them out at as many places as possible where people are likely to be interested in engaging with these kind of ideas, like, leave them at community centers in black and white for, people to pick up and, color in and, yeah, just like really engage with the posters and pictures by coloring them in. We will also get some printed out, and yeah, please do get in touch if you want us to send those printed versions for you. And then they will also have like a sort of back side of the poster that has a QR code bringing taking you to the website, or the reader to the website, and then has a bit more about the project. So yeah, please do leave the posters around, and obviously whenever you hand them to people, do just like tell them about this project. Give them our contact details, which I will put on the screen while I give Joe and then Annette very brief.
Yes, I was just going to say that when I saw the one of the trees, I thought it would be lovely to have, an A4 sheet with leaf cutouts, and then people could write things on the leaves and put those around the picture. You could do the same with the notes. You could do the same with the letters. You said that would make it more interactive, and you'd have another resource there that you could add to it, which would be a lot better than those horrible post-it notes. But on those lines, you have a central image, but you can add to it, so you can go beyond that frame. Yeah.
Love that. Yeah, Joe.
Sorry, I was about to enter a short shameless plug in some of the other Festival of Debate events that I thought maybe speak to some of the themes that came up for discussion and some of the posters. And there's an event we've got coming up, which is an online event. I realise people are participating from lots of different places this evening. It's called Hospicing Modernity, and it's written by an amazing writer called Vanessa Manchego de Oliveira. And she is doing an online talk for us on the 10th of May at 5:30 p.m. GMT, UK time. And I just really highly recommend, that talk and that event for everyone. She speaks really eloquently about this need for hospicing modernity and allowing space and time for modernity to die, essentially. And she presents really, really useful frameworks of essentially unlearning the kind of wide tapestry of sort of capitalism and neoliberalism that's just ever present in our relationships with each other, in our society, in our workplaces. And yeah, we found her a really sort of profoundly interesting writer and sort of activist, and she's kind of made us reconsider all of the work that we do within the Festival of Debate and Opus, which is the social enterprise that we work for in Sheffield, that also runs another number of projects that speak to this kind of activist space. So yeah, that's an online event. It's free, point of access. 10th of May. It's on the Festival of Debate website, festivaldebate.com. And for those of you in Sheffield, there's loads of stuff coming up. We've got Brian Eno on Monday evening, Gary Young next week, and a whole range of other stuff coming.
And can I jump in and do a shameless plug? For Saturday morning, there is a community rally for accountability and protest outside the town hall beginning at 10:30. And it would be great to see all Sheffielders there. It's in the wake of the Street Tree Inquiry report. And there'll be other community groups there and campaigners asking for accountability in our council.
Nice one. Any final more other words, sign-ups, encouraged? I am trying to get the I have a final slide that has like loads of our like contact details, but my screen is totally frozen. Iona, if you can get it up, please do. Meanwhile, oh, amazing. Thank you. Yeah, we are very, very shortly wrapping up, but I will let Leo do the do a shout out. But first, I just want to draw your attention to the slide that Iona has kindly got up. So yes, please do keep your contact details coming towards us so that we can keep you updated on what's next for this project. And yeah, feel free to contact us on any of those personal or campaign or organizational social media and email details that are now up on the screen. And yeah, really, really appreciate you all being here, and massive thanks. And like I've already said a million times, we are going to go forward with this project. Langley Chase Foundation is going to keep funding us, which is amazing. So yeah, that whatever that looks like is still slightly kind of, we'll be informed, for instance, by tonight, and we'll take this away and process it. But please do stay in touch with us. And yeah, Leo, final shout out.
As I mentioned in the chat, we'll be attending May Day in Sheffield. Come say hi. We'll be wearing red high-vis and being extremely loud. It just occurred to me that if you are in Glasgow and interested in getting involved in something like Acorn, it's not called Acorn up there, it's called Living Rent. That's our sister organisation north of the wall. If you're interested in getting involved in community organising around renters' rights, Living Rent in Scotland, not Acorn.
Lovely. I'll see you at May Day.
Amazing. Yeah, I think there is somebody from Living Rent. Yeah. Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. I will once more put the link to the posters on our website where you can download them from into the chat so that you have it right there, right now. And yeah, please keep in touch. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Turning up and being such a wonderful, wonderful, active participant group. Whatever, I am lost for words. It's 8:30. Thank you so much. Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Cheers, everybody. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.